words of a former Prime Minister, the news here in the UK has been dominated by one thing over the last couple of weeks. That is education, education and education. Indeed, it would seem at times as if government policy has been directed by a dodgy sat-nav. We seem to keep making U-turns at every available opportunity. It all began in the spring with the closure of schools due to the coronavirus pandemic. Because students weren't able to sit their exams, it was decided that they would be given grades based on teacher assessment. To try and make things fair, it was also agreed that there would be a moderation of these grades. But this is where it really hit the fan. Firstly, in Scotland, we discovered that students in some parts, particularly poorer areas, had been unfairly marked down because of the area or the school that they were a part of. After a week of debacle in the news, eventually the Scottish Government U-turned on their original decision. You would have thought that the government in Westminster would have learnt from the problems in Scotland, but oh no, they didn't. After insisting that there would be no U-turn over the original policy, eventually the Westminster government followed suit. As I've looked at how we as a society have responded to this chaotic situation, I think it's reminded me about 4 things that we can learn about our society. The first is that we want integrity from our politicians. We expect that they should tell the truth, even if we fear that they won't. We want them to keep to their promises and to mean what they say. Secondly, we want impartiality when it comes to people's exam results. We want people to get what they deserve. And we don't want them to be marked down simply because of the fact that they belong to a certain group in society. Now, there is a certain irony about all of this. Many of those who are so outraged about what has taken place are those who also engage in identity politics. And identity politics regularly makes judgments about people not on the basis of what they individually have done, but on the basis of the group that they belong to within society. Thirdly, this shows that we have a compassion and a concern for the poor. Those in our society who are already disadvantaged shouldn't be further disadvantaged in this way. And fourthly, as so often happens at this time of year, we want to remind students that their ultimate worth and value does not come from the grades that they have been awarded. They have an intrinsic value beyond and above their grades, and their future doesn't have to be defined by their grades. I was interested to see that on Twitter, Jeremy Clarkson wanted to remind the world that he got 1 C and 2 U's in his A-levels, so if your A-level results were bad, don't worry too much. Although I'm not quite sure that that necessarily made the point that he hoped. I can see some parents saying to their children, if you don't work hard, you'll end up like Jeremy Clarkson. But why do we respond in these 4 ways? Well, I want to suggest that actually these 4 reactions to this current situation reveal that although we live in a secular society, we are far more Christian in our convictions and our reactions than maybe we would think. Firstly, we demand and expect integrity from our leaders. Jesus was speaking to some of the leaders of his day, and he told them not to make oaths, but simply let their yes be yes and their no be no. These leaders had devised an elaborate system by which they didn't really need to keep their promises, and Jesus says, do not do that. In fact, you shouldn't need to make oaths at all because people should be able to believe what you say. Secondly, we want impartiality. And the Bible says that God is a God who does not show favoritism. His judgment is completely just and fair. It is not based on your family background. It is not based on the group that you belong to. It is based on you as an individual. And the Bible says that we too in our judgment should not show partiality. Our justice and our judgments should be fair. Thirdly, we have shown our concern for those who are poor and disadvantaged. But why? Why do we live in a society where we show such concern for those who are less privileged than others? Because we live in a society that has been shaped by the teaching and the example of Jesus. Jesus came to proclaim good news to those who are poor, and then consistently through his life showed that concern in the way that he met with and invested in those who were poor, those who were outcast, and those who were on the margins of society. We live in a society that has been revolutionized by the life and teaching of Jesus Christ. Finally, our response to all these things shows that we believe that we are valuable, regardless of our exam results, that we are not defined by our grades. But why is that the case? And if we are not defined by our grades, what are we defined by? The problem for a secular society is that there seems to be no objective basis to talk about real human value. If evolution is the only story we have to account for who we are, where do we get this sense of universal human value? Why do we think that we're so special? But we live in a society that has been shaped by the Judeo-Christian worldview, and shaped by this idea that we have value and significance because we are created in the image of God. We are created with real value because we are created to know and relate to the God who made us. And Christianity says more than that as well. It says that we also have value and significance because this God became one of us and was willing to go to a cross and die for us because he values you and because he values me. You see, the reality is that we so often fail to live up to the demands that we place upon our leaders. We want them to live lives of integrity and honesty, but if we are honest, we have to admit that we don't always do that. We don't always keep our own words, do we? We want our leaders to show impartiality in their judgments, but so often we have to confess that maybe sometimes we have shown partiality and favouritism in the way that we live. We want our leaders to show a concern and a compassion for the poor, and yet although we may talk much about that, do we put our money where our mouth is? Do we really live that out every day? You see, the reality is that all of us have failed to live up to what we demand of others and what we know ultimately should be demanded of us. And if in the exam of life God was to pass his judgment on our lives, the reality is that all of us would have failed. And yet this is the wonderful thing, that God is not simply a God of justice, but God is also a God of great love and forgiveness. And in the cross of Jesus, we see a God who is willing to give us what we do not deserve. His love, his forgiveness, and a fresh start. I wonder, do you know that value and significance that comes from knowing the God of the universe? Knowing that your value does not come from the grades that you got or failed to get, but that your value and significance comes from the fact that you are loved by God, that you are given what you don't deserve, and invited into a relationship with him. That is our ultimate value and significance. Why not come to discover him and discover infinite value and significance in the God of the universe and his love for you in Jesus?